I was out getting milk at the store, but I'm back. Since Viper released, it's become abundantly clear that Fizz range players think melee players shouldn't have rights anymore. Can hit a raged ability. Yeah, but my GCD rolls faster than Sonic the Hedgehog, so I don't know what you want me to do about that. Hello, gamers. I feel like Square Enix messed up recently, and nobody wants to talk about it because either they don't care, which is fine, I guess, or because they were being censored in the Balance Discord, which I thought was really funny. I went ahead and cleared the tier in less than a week, which is not that impressive. This has been the easiest tier to clear in potentially recorded Final Fantasy XIV history. I'm not 100% on that because I don't have all the stats, but I know that a lot of people cleared this tier. Why am I telling you this? Is it to flex? Absolutely the not. We need to talk about Viper and the changes that were made to the class with very little time before Savage, because I honestly feel like the identity of this class remains similar, but the fun of the class was very much removed. Before we get further into this, I want to let you guys know I literally do not care about the fact that it does more damage now. There's been a trend in Final Fantasy XIV of simplifying classes to try to make them easily playable for the masses, and I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with wanting lots of people to be able to play the game and play the way that they want to play the game. I think that's entirely fine. But some of the changes you've seen to classes and jobs before have been pretty egregious. We've seen things like Summoner get completely reworked to become the easiest class in the entire game. So much so that people are calling Summoner a Fizz range class, even though it's like, you know, categorically a caster, but that's the joke if you don't get it, because Summoner is a caster and people are calling it Fizz range. Much like our friend in the background here, Viper has had its identity somewhat altered. Now, a lot of people say that the rotation for Viper didn't change and that nothing really changed as a result of this, but I'm going to go into why that's not true. In the 7.05 patch notes, they made a lot of job changes, and Viper got 2 job changes since its release already that were both pretty major feeling. One of them just increased the range on Viper, which I think was a really good decision, because I'm not gonna lie, having that many attacks that fast when you're doing mechanics that require you to go in and out can be very difficult, and I think that those changes on range were good. The second change they said they were gonna make was to positionals on Viper, as Viper has very frequent positionals and a lot of positionals. It's a lot to keep track of if you're just going back and forth on the boss hitbox and you have your Dreadwinder to worry about, or a Vicewinder now is what it's called, and your rear and flank combos, which are going to be red and green respectively. But any melee player can tell you that doing positionals isn't a difficult thing, and it comes with learning the job, especially because you have True North stacks. So as I was saying, they made lots of changes to lots of classes, rather than nerfing Pictomancer, which was the clear solution that would have just taken it from being 3k above every other DPS class to being in line with the other casters and then slightly buffing Black Mage. What they did is buff like almost every other job in the entire game. And some of these were great. In fact, Samurai players, I'm pretty sure, are all celebrating having a pizza party somewhere every other Tuesday, because now Samurai is just absolutely loaded. But as you can see here, Viper got a lot of changes, lots of potency increases, and the removal of Noxious Nash. Now, I have 2 thoughts on this. One is, you just took the poison out of the Viper class. And 2, I think that was an incredibly bad change for the design of the game. Now, before I get shot, I just want to remind you guys that I am very happy with my life and do not wish to die anytime soon. So, you know, if I disappear, don't forget, guys, I like my life. Viper had a few things that made it a unique class. One was how fast the GCD rolling is. A lot of the GCD presses on this class feel very good because they're fast, especially when you get your 2 buffs up, your damage buff and your haste buff. The burst feels incredibly satisfying to execute, and it's such a fun class. One of the things that makes it unique, well, not entirely unique, because I guess Reaper has double Enshroud. You get double Reawaken combo, which allows you to get 2 Reawakenings off in one burst. That's one fun thing about it. The second fun thing about it is just how many buttons there are to press. And there's tons of classes that just don't really feel like they have a lot of depth to the weaving portion of them. But Viper will keep you incredibly busy in terms of just pressing buttons. Me as an ADHD person, this is the perfect class to stimulate my brain when I'm raiding, and it really helps me lock in. The third thing it has is buffs and debuffs to keep up. Now, the debuff is called Noxious Nash, or it was before they ripped my heart out and stomped on it. Basically, Noxious Nash was a 20-second debuff that you could reapply by using Reaving Fangs and what was called Dreadwinder, which would add 20 seconds to that debuff. And that debuff would increase your damage dealt by a fairly big amount by keeping it up throughout the fight, and if you overcap it, you lose damage. If you let it fall off, you lose damage. Basically, it was something to balance while you were doing your rotation. Now, a lot of players in the game will say that that was pretty easy to keep up, and truthfully, yes, it was. But a lot of the players that are saying it was easy to keep up didn't actually keep it up 100% of the time, or they overcapped it. Something that is true of all online spaces is that people that don't know what they're talking about will feel like their opinion makes just as much sense as the people that do know what they're talking about. And unfortunately, a majority of players don't raid on the high end and don't optimize their classes when they're raiding on the high end. The damage difference between a below average player and a top 1% player is pretty significant. Many players who are saying that the rotation of the class doesn't change didn't actually play the class correctly, because there was a lot of timing involved in playing this class and making sure that you don't overcap on your debuff. Sure, if you're doing the same fight over and over, you're going to learn the rotation for the fight if you know how to optimize and if you put in the effort to actually play the class correctly, but it's going to change by the fight, as you could see with the Savages, where there's plenty of fights where you don't actually have full uptime unless you use your Uncoiled Fury, and if you had to manage that in a debuff, it would keep you on your toes a lot more, which would make optimizing Viper a lot of fun because you would have to put in the time to make sure that you can keep your debuff up. When they took this debuff out, they did in fact change the rotation of Viper, because whereas before you would have had to balance your debuff while keeping up your rotation, now you don't have to worry about balancing that debuff anymore, meaning that your rotation has been reduced to just pressing the glowy button. Me personally, I'm still pretty satisfied with how Viper plays in terms of the fact that it's just a fast class and it makes me feel really good to press all the buttons. But I would be lying if I said that this class didn't feel like it had a lot taken out of it in terms of the thinking factor. For players who did like to optimize damage while raiding in the late game, this change probably doesn't affect you too much because pressing your buttons in one order or the other doesn't really matter when it becomes muscle memory anyways. But for me, the fun has always been getting to the point of learning the muscle memory, where you would have to make conscious decisions to optimize your uptime. It's similar to how certain people will save Uncoiled Fury at different times of boss fights to make sure that they have range uptime, whereas other people will just gap close on the snapshot. In removing the debuff, they've effectively taken out the only part of Viper that required you to think. Now, Vicewinder is essentially a button that you press on cooldown, except for when you're doing a double reawakening, and because of that, it's a lot less engaging to play the class, which leads us back to the beginning of this video where I was talking about how they like to simplify jobs. In my opinion, Final Fantasy XIV is one of the greatest games that I have ever played in my entire life. I love this game to death. I love the story of this game. I love the raid content of this game. The social aspect of this game is really funny because people get really dramatic over really silly things. But I love this game, and I've played many of the jobs in this game. And me personally, I can really tell how simple a lot of the jobs have gotten over time. Summoner is one example of it. Heck, even Monk between Shadowbringers and Endwalker got so simplified that almost every Monk player I knew quit the game until they brought back a rotation for it. Now, I get this only affects like a very small portion of the player base, because obviously an overwhelming majority of people felt that Viper was too hard, otherwise they wouldn't have changed it. But in my opinion, as someone that's been playing Melee for 4 tiers now, even though I don't want them to remove positionals, I personally would have rather they removed the positionals on Hunter's Coil and Swiftskin's Coil, the procs you get after Dreadwinder, now Vicewinder, than removing Noxious Nash. Because positionals are something that is a lot easier to keep track of and something that comes naturally to Melee classes, and I understand that Viper has a lot of them, but if they were going to simplify the class, I would have preferred they stuck to what they said and removed some of the positionals and kept the debuff. Viper, when it came out, was a class that really tickled my brain and my fingers because I really liked how fast the job felt to play, and I really liked how engaged it kept me with the debuff. Before this change, you would have to make sure that your debuff is long enough to hit the double reawakening window without dropping the dot if you wanted to maximize your damage. Now you don't have to do that anymore. You only have to worry about your buffs, which are incredibly easy to apply. Ultimately, yes, at the end of the day, everything's going to be muscle memory anyways, and if you optimize, you're going to get used to things the way they are per fight, and that's fine. But when you can go into Savage or Ultimate raiding with a job and you don't feel like you have to even figure out how to optimize your rotation at all, and your 2 minutes are all perfectly aligned without having to think much on it, and you're just pressing your buttons on cooldown, that feels very simple to me and took a lot of what I enjoyed about Viper and kind of tossed it out. I do like how fast the job is. That hasn't changed, and I do think that it's great they left the job fast. If they took that out of Viper, Viper would be a dead job. Honestly, it probably wouldn't even be dead, but it just would be a lot less fun. But right now, there's only a few things you have to pay attention to when you're playing the job. Yes, you have to not overcap Uncoiled Fury, but that's not difficult to do. You just look at your charges on your little sword bar thing, which I'm gonna be honest, I don't even think it does anything because it just tells you what button to press anyways. Most people aren't looking at this. Most people are just like going, oh, Steel Fangs now, Reaving Fangs now, Steel Fangs now, red button rear, green button flank. And of course, you had to also pay attention to your double reawakenings. But the only thing you have to do there is make sure your buffs are up, which is incredibly easy to do. Ultimately, I understand why the change was made. It's a good thing for a majority of the player base and a less fun thing for the high-end raiding community. But I really do wish they didn't go down this rabbit hole of trying to make every class super brain-dead easy, because at the end of the day, the only hard content in the game is your Savage and Ultimate content, and it's arguably not even that difficult if you just study up and watch VODs. So for players that really like to challenge themselves, taking jobs into endgame that are also hard to optimize can be very fun, and taking your ability to optimize out of the job will always feel less good to players who really like to give it their best and put the work in to squeeze every little bit of damage out. Ultimately, I know not every Viper player cares about this, and probably a majority don't. If you go check out the balance, actually, after they were done censoring the entire community who was being upset about the changes, all the people talking there are like, oh wow, I really like Viper, guys, Viper's so fun. But I do think this is sort of a slippery slope. In my opinion, Viper has become sort of melee summoner. Arguably a little bit more difficult than that, but man, when they took away the one thing we actually had to manage outside of, you know, Uncoiled Fury, it just felt really bad. So, you know, at the end of the day, maybe I'm whining about nothing because the difficulty of this class was like a 5th grader could play it, and now it's like a 1st grader can play it. So at the end of the day, it's still being played by elementary schoolers. But for my ADHD has, I really liked the fact that my brain was fully engaged when playing this job, and I'm not gonna lie, after this tier, I can say with confidence, I am no longer engaged with this job. I think the right thing to do in MMOs is to make it so that each job has its own unique identity, and people can find jobs that they enjoy and play them because they enjoy playing them. I don't think it's right to force players who really like the job off of that job because someone else wanted to play it. And that's kind of what it feels like here. It feels like some people were upset that the job was actually challenging and engaging, and they couldn't play the job. So instead of playing a different melee job or going back to like tank or healer or whatever they were playing before, they complained, and then we got this job kind of stripped of a lot of what made it engaging. So I don't know. You guys can, you know, think whatever you want about it. I think it's totally fair for you guys to all be like okay with the changes or not really give a shit. But for me, this was a big thing. And as someone that was really excited to make a guide on this job because I really like how it plays and I liked how engaging it was, I think I'm a little less excited about it now because it feels very easy to play. Like, do you guys even need a guide on this job? It just kind of glows and then you just pick the right button. Anyways, I do hope if they're going to make any other changes to Viper that they will make it so some of the abilities that are higher damaging become accessible in earlier levels, so that way you can play Viper in older content and still deal decent damage because, oh man, that is bad below level 100. But yeah, anyways, see ya.